From here to the stars, I am your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. Our guest today is Dr. Stephen Webb. Dr. Webb has a PhD in theoretical physics and works at the University of Portsmouth on the south coast of England. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Webb. He has a PhD in theoretical physics and works at the University of Portsmouth on the south coast of England. Dr. Webb is scheduled to be one of the keynote speakers at our 8th Interstellar Symposium to be held July 10 to 13, 2023 in Montreal, Quebec. His talk is tentatively titled, Silence is Golden, SETI and the Fermi Paradox, a topic he is well versed in as an active member of the UK SETI Research Network and having done a TED Talk titled, Where Are All the Aliens?, which has had over 6 million views on YouTube, and having written a best-selling book on the topic titled, Where is Everybody?, in which he goes over a wide variety of approaches to Fermi's famous question. So, Doctor, if you would, describe the Fermi Paradox in general for the possibly one person in the audience who's not familiar with it, and also some of the more popular solutions to it and how your answer differs from most.
Crudely put, it's this distinction between two expectations. So on the one hand, we know the universe is big. We know there's lots of stuff in there. And we know now that there are many, many planets. There are many possible homes for life. Now, if we take the Copernican principle and we say there's nothing special about Earth, there's nothing special about us, then we might reasonably expect that on some of those planets out there, life will start, life will evolve, and there will be, presumably, extraterrestrial civilizations out there. So we naively expect there to be civilizations. On the other hand, the universe is old. And one of the great triumphs of science over the past couple of decades is we know pretty much exactly how old it is. It's about 30.8 billion years old. And there seems to have been plenty of time for those civilizations, if they exist, to have developed and reached our level of technical competence and then gone on. They could be tens of millions of years older than us, or come into existence tens of millions of years before us, maybe hundreds of millions of years before us, maybe billions of years before us. So if they survive, and if we apply the Copernican principle to them, and they follow the same exponential increase in technological prowess that we've experienced, you might reasonably expect them to be much, much, much more advanced technically than us. So they should be able to disturb the universe, as it were, in a way that we should now be able to observe. You could ask, as Fermi himself did, really, where is everybody? Why aren't they here indeed right now? So we have this naive expectation that they're out there and they should be visible. And observationally, the universe seems to be quiet. So that, in a nutshell, is the Fermi Paradox. And there are lots of approaches, as you've intimated, to thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. And although we don't actually see anybody, you've theoretically suggested through what the filter. I watched your TED Talk that we may be completely alone. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Okay, so I think there are three broad classes of approach. You could argue that there isn't any paradox, that actually they're here, and people will point to evidence such as UFOs or UAPs. You could take the standard scientific approach, I think the default approach, which is they exist and they're out there, but there's a large phase space and we need to to explore a little bit more, but we will find them. The third class, which I find a little bit more compelling, is that we're alone. It's just us. And the argument I make in the TED Talk is that maybe we need a big universe. Maybe the universe has to be that big in order for it to produce intelligent life, or for it to be likely that intelligent life is produced. And if you think about it, we need, presumably, to produce a technological civilization, we need a rocky planet, a one with certain elements that are available to a subsequent civilization. But for life to occur, as far as we know, we want that rocky planet to have water. So that's a condition. We need an abiogenesis event. We need to get from non-life to life. We have no idea how that occurred on Earth. It might be an easy process, but it might be a very, very, very difficult process indeed to get from chemicals, prebiotic chemicals, to something that we can call life. If it occurs, it needs to occur on a planet that's going to have a stable climate over eons. I mean, Earth has been relatively clement for billions of years. It could have gone the way of Venus, which is a hell place, or Mars, which is not conducive to life at present. You need a step change in life. We need to go from simple unicellular life to complex multicellular life in order to produce intelligence. You need a species then that has abstract intelligence. It's not clear to me that someone that can develop calculus or think about general relativity has a level of intelligence that is necessarily required to be successful in evolutionary terms. So we need that abstract intelligence. We need, because this would be a social endeavor, we're talking about beings that are disturbing the universe over distances that other civilizations could then detect. So we need a social species with a complex grammar so that they can communicate complex topics, and on and on and on. There are so many steps, I think, that leads to something that we would classify as a advanced technological society capable of making its presence felt across interstellar distances. I think there are a sufficient number of perhaps unlikely steps in that chain to require a big universe with trillions of planets where it's going to happen somewhere. Seems to have happened here, but not necessarily anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. I've always considered biological life, just the beginning step, to be probably like really, really common. It could be everywhere. But I've wondered about all of the intermediate steps of going all the way to civilized, species. That sounds like a lot of steps.
It does, doesn't it? And I think that's one of the key questions in science, the role that biology and possibly intelligence plays in the universe. And it's a fascinating question. Is it just us, or this one speck in a vast universe, or is life itself relatively common and we've got low grades, quality of life spread out everywhere? Mm-hmm. Are there really, really interesting evolutionary pathways that have been taken on other planets, but just have not led to technology? Mm-hmm. Or what? Or maybe they're out there and somehow hiding. It's a fascinating question.
Mm-hmm. When I first watched your TED Talk in preparing for this interview, I was disappointed at the idea that we could be the only people in the universe, the only intelligent civilization at live today. But then after a while, I felt a little comfort in the idea that there's a buffer, a distance buffer between us and some competitors.
well, I mean that is one of the approaches that some people take to the Fermi paradox, that there's a first move advantage for a civilization that might not want to have competitors. So it's seek out new life, new civilizations, and destroy them. So
yeah.
hope not.
Okay. Let's see. If you feel we are alone in the universe, and the TED Talk indicates this seems to be what you feel, why are you a member of the UK SETI Research Network, a group dedicated to searching for extraterrestrial intelligence?
So I'm never 100% confident on anything.
Okay.
I think it's a fascinating question, and it's a question that we can potentially solve by observation. What I want to explore in the keynote in Montreal is this notion, perhaps, that we might hope that traditional SETI doesn't succeed. And it's something I've been thinking about in recent months. So traditional observational SETI, it's over 60 years old. It started with Frank Drake, sadly passed a couple of months ago, looking at two stars with a radio telescope, Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. Didn't find anything. And since then, the scope of SETI, traditional SETI, has expanded enormously. And in particular, the computational power that we can throw at this is unimaginable compared to 62 years ago. So we've been looking and so far found nothing or heard nothing. And a plausible approach to the Fermi paradox, one way of thinking about that, is simply that the distance between stars is too great to permit interstellar travel. And therefore, extraterrestrial intelligences, if they want to make their presence felt, they send radio communications instead. It's fast, it's cheap, it's easily controllable. Hence the logic behind looking for these SETI signals. But if we detect radio signals from SETI, traditional SETI, and we don't detect evidence of interstellar travel, the technosignatures, things like, I don't know, antimatter rockets or beamed energy or ultra relativistic craft leaving an imprint in the cosmic ray, in the cosmic microwave background. All sorts of technosignatures you can imagine from highly advanced civilizations engaging in interstellar travel. If we don't detect that, but we do detect traditional SETI, people using radio to communicate, I think that means there's an increased chance that interstellar travel is impossible, because extraterrestrial civilizations will have had millions or billions of years to try and develop that technology. And that would disappoint me.
Mm-hmm.
I would like interstellar travel to be possible. I like to think that a future for us is one that we can engage in that. And I just think a noisy universe might indicate that those civilizations, they can talk, but they can't walk. And that would be, to me, disappointing. Of course, the universe doesn't care at all what I find disappointing or not. It is what it is. But I'd like to explore, I think, some of those notions in the talk.
Okay. You've said that that your favorite author is Isaac Asimov. I have a particular fondness for Isaac Asimov myself. Back in my 20s, I stumbled across a copy of I, Robot. Reading that book, I was hooked. I started looking for other books by him and found his Foundation series and read through those. I own about 30 of his books, and I've read them all. How did you first encounter and become hooked on Isaac Asimov, and how did your interest in his work grow over time?
So, I mean, behind me, I don't know if you can see, but I've got just over 500
Okay.
Asimov books.
How many did he write in the end? I remember when he broke 300.
I think the canonical list is now 506.
Wow.
Three of which are wall posters. I think I've got essentially no chance of getting those. That they would have been on teachers' walls. But I've got as many, I think, as I can. I came across Asimov when I was a child. I remember I couldn't even pronounce his name. It was Asiminov, my childish tongue.
Okay.
And it was one of his children's books. He wrote for children as well. And I was quite a precocious reader, and I went to the local library. And I quickly learned that I'd never run out of stuff to read if I just followed him, because it just seemed to be every time I went in there was more Asimov books. And I actually got I think a really good grounding in science from reading Asimov. So he's known as a science fiction author, but the bulk of his output was non-fiction, and in particular science. And I found actually I didn't need to study much up until graduate school. Then it hit me that actually there's some work involved here. But I actually had a really good grounding in science from Asimov books, in his science books, and in particular the way he had this cool, rational approach to developing an argument. And it just chimed with me. And yeah.
Okay. That kind of leads into my next question. Shortly after discovering Isaac Asimov's science fiction, I stumbled upon one of his nonfiction books. It was a collection of scientific essays he'd written for various magazines. I found it even more engrossing than his science fiction. So over time, I bought up about 24 of his science essays and read all of them too. Which one of his essays do you find most insightful, if indeed you can name only one?
Oh, I can't name one. Let me give you, rather than an essay, a book, which I disagree with. But again, I enjoy his logical approach to the question. So the book would be Extraterrestrial Civilizations. And Asimov, in that book, essentially goes through the Drake equation, which is a means of estimating how many civilizations there might be out there. The Drake equation isn't an equation like F equals ma or E equals mc squared. I mean, it's not it's a means of quantifying our ignorance. But nevertheless, it gives us a handle on what we might expect when we observe. And Asimov came up with a number that I find really implausible for the number of extraterrestrial civilizations that are out there. But I appreciated his logical approach to developing that number, and I learned an awful lot about the Drake equation and astronomy in general. What I find interesting is that Asimov clearly believed that we live in a galaxy where there are lots of advanced extraterrestrial civilizations doing their stuff. But you mentioned Foundation. In the Foundation trilogy, there are no aliens. It's a humans-only galaxy. And something psychologically, partly maybe because I love those books so much, the Foundation books, I'm actually quite happy with that idea that it's a humans-only galaxy. If we get out there, if it's us that are out there, if it turns out that we're in a Star Trek galaxy where we're engaging with other civilizations, I'd be happy with that as well, because that was part of my childhood. What really worries me is that maybe interstellar travel is just so difficult, and civilizations, if they occur, might not be long lasting. And it will just be lots of individual civilizations that perhaps never meet, never know for sure whether there's anyone else out there. And that would be a frustrating universe, I think, to live in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Speaking of which, in the 1970s, I read a book Isaac Asimov wrote in collaboration with Stephen H. Dole, an astronomer, titled Planets for Man. It was copyrighted in 1964, yet it analyzed in a step-by-step way how many planets will prove habitable for human beings in our galaxy. It covered many features of planets that we are familiar with today, such as the Goldilocks orbits, upper and lower limits, plate tectonics, things like that. And it did this all in a time when the total number of extrasolar planets that had been discovered were still zero. Their estimate of habitable planets in our galaxy was 600 million, a huge number, but they were trying to be cautious in their projection. Far larger estimates have been developed since then based on the discovery of actual, thousands of extrasolar planets. What are your thoughts concerning habitable planets? And can you start, and you can start anywhere, with nearby ones, the number in our galaxy, or that particular book by Isaac Asimov, which I happen to have right here.
You're right. It's quite prescient in that it says there's going to be loads of habitable planets out there, when at the time it wasn't 100% sure that planetary systems were a natural concomitant of stellar formation. I think astronomers probably at that time thought it was. But I remember textbooks in the library when that came out hadn't ruled out the planetary formation hypothesis that suggested that our solar system came into being through a near collision with another star, and that collision pulled off material from the sun, which later coalesced to produce the solar system. Was developed by genes in particular, that theory, and it was to overcome a problem to do with the distribution of angular momentum in the solar system. So there was still, I think, adherence when that book was developed. There's still adherence to this idea that maybe because of this angular momentum problem, that the solar system was actually unique and it was caused by this near collision. Of course, we know that that's nonsense. We have a really good theory now of stellar formation. There's some details that we need to pin down, but essentially you've got a collapsing cloud of gas and dust that heats up in the central regions, and as a natural process of that, we're going to get planets. Habitable planets, that has a technical meaning nowadays, in that we're looking for planets with water. There's this idea that if you want to find life, you find water. And I mentioned that earlier with one of the steps. We need a rocky planet, probably, if we want to have a civilization that can build things. It's got to have material to build it with. But it needs water. Life needs water. And we can't really imagine, I think, another solvent that works in the way that water does to produce and permit life to exist. I realize that we're possibly anthropomorphic here, and it's life as we know it, but it's difficult to argue about life as we don't know it. So we need water. And that means that a planet can't be too close to a star, because the heat will essentially boil off the atmosphere and the water. It can't be too far away from the star, because then the water would be locked up in ice and it's not going to do its job, the job we need it to do. So we need it to be in the planet to be in that Goldilocks zone, where it's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right for liquid water. And then liquid water can do its stuff. Now, by far, the largest number of stars in the galaxy by type are small stars, I mean K-type stars. And it turns out that the habitable zone, the Goldilocks zone, if you like, for these small stars is quite close to the planet. So that the habitable zone, in terms of the total amount of habitable zone real estate in the galaxy, is going to be close to these K-type stars, simply because there's so many of them. And we've even discovered, astronomers have discovered planets in the habitable zones of these small stars. Whether they are habitable in the sense that we are going to talk about it in everyday life, you know, is it inhabitable? That's a different question, because these stars, these small stars, can actually be quite nasty in terms of flaring and sending out cosmic rays and high energy particles and the rest of it. And if the planet is really quite close to the star, it's not necessarily going to be a very pleasant place for life to evolve. So I think the jury's still out whether these small stars are the best place to look for life, because there's so many of them, and we're going to have so many stars in that habitable, planets in that habitable zone around them. Whether we should be looking for that, or whether we should be looking really for sun-like stars, where the habitable zone's a little bit further away. Conditions might be a bit more clement and conducive. I think one of the great things about living in this time is that we might actually have an answer to this sort of question in the next couple of decades, with the tremendous observatories that are coming online. We might actually start to characterize planetary atmospheres, get a better understanding of what these stars are like. And I'm really, really positive that while I'm still here, I'll get an answer to that question at least. A little bit more about the habitability of stars and planets. I'm not convinced I'll get an answer to whether any of them are actually inhabited, unfortunately.
Okay. That was Dr. Stephen Webb. This has been From Here to the Stars, a video series produced by the Interstellar Research Group. The IRG is a non-profit organization dedicated to thoroughly exploring the science and engineering that can eventually open up the reality of interstellar travel. Find out more about our next symposium at irg.space. I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to our channel for other such videos. On behalf of all of us here at the Interstellar Research Group, I thank you.